I mean, if you look at carp fishing as it is now, and you know how avenues to get into carp fishing, there's so many. You know, everybody knows somebody who goes carp fishing. It's become that popular. You know, you look at the social media that's out there, and you know, there's fishing shows on mainstream TV. But I remember back when I started carp fishing, I didn't actually know anyone who did it, and you know, I had to kind of learn for myself because I didn't have a friend who went. I'd stumbled across this lake. I'd done a bit of bream fishing before this. We're talking, this is late 80s, early 90s. You know, even younger than that, I used to go fishing on my, you know, on my holidays with the family, but not serious fishing, you know. So I stumbled across this lake, which is, it's about half a mile away from where I am now. It's only a small pit and it held some decent fish in it. And I thought, you know, I was match fishing, pleasure fishing it, and I kind of looked across the lake and I thought, I want to catch one of them, you know, when the fish was showing. And there was an old photo house in one of the old outbuildings. It was all a bit decrepit, but there was a photo house where, you know, the guys who fished it put these carp up, and I thought, you know, I want to fish for one of them. So there was never a point in my fishing, even now, where I say I want to target big fish, because I still fish plenty of places that don't have big fish in them, but I think as anglers we're naturally drawn to the bigger ones, and that's certainly what happened to me back then, because like I say, I'd see these fish showing or cruising around on a summer's afternoon and I'm like, I don't want to catch that little skimmer anymore. I want to catch one of them. How do you do that? You know, when you talk about big fish, and you know, certainly when I started carp fishing there was a massive difference across the country where you would find big fish, and it certainly wasn't here. You know, I live in Hull, the north of England, and it's although we are blessed with some absolutely stunning carp fisheries, we've never really been blessed with big fish. And you know, if somebody has a 30 around here, it gets talked about even now. You know, people will say, oh, so-and-so's had this from there, or so-and-so, you know, whereas you have a 30 on B2, no one bats an eyelid. You know, so that divide is still there. And you know, when we talk about fishing for big fish, I'm not going to suddenly change my lifestyle and start spending half of my life in the southern part of the country, because you know, I don't think it's good for you. I don't think it's healthy, you know, and I just accept where I am. This is where I live, and you know, times are changing a little bit. There are, you know, bigger fish up here, but for the most part I'm happy with what I've got in this area of the country. I think when you've been fishing a few years and you've got a bit of that experience under your belt, there's certain stuff that you don't worry about anymore, certain stuff that's really important. Mainline is my biggest OCD, because that is massively important. And you know, as anglers we look back at or we should, and hopefully I'm going to talk a little bit about this as we go through this, we reflect on what we've done. There was a pair of 30-pound commons not far from here, and I lost one of them, and I lost it because my mainline was knackered, and there was only one person to blame for that. So there's certain things that I really have a bit of OCD about, but there's other stuff that I'm not really interested in. And when I see people who are kind of like newer to carping or not been doing carping long, they've got like, they're really intensely worried about this, and I'm like, well, I was, but I'm not now, because I've learned that doesn't really matter. You know, for example, you know, all having the same rods and everything, look, and your bobbins must sit tight and your handles, and you know, I've never been one for, maybe I was a little bit early in my early years, but you know, so I kind of all my mental space, all my focus goes into what I feel is the most important thing. And that's, generally speaking, bait and location, because they're the two things that if you haven't got those right, you know, you're in for a lonely session. So there's odd things in carp fishing where I think people are worrying about things that they needn't, but it's not always a problem. But I save all my brain space for what I feel I should be thinking about, and that's where are the fish and what are they doing and what's my best method to catch them. I tend not to follow moon phases or pressure, and that sounds crazy for a carp angler, doesn't it? But my work dictates when I go fishing. I can't pick and choose. You know, I can't like see the moon phases and what the barometer's doing and say, right, that's when I'm going, because I go when my work allows it. So in many respects I just have to make the most of what I've got, and yeah, that's sometimes not a good thing, because I have, well, just recently, you know, I had a couple of days off, high pressure, horribly hot and appalling fishing conditions. You know, the week before that was low pressure and the syndicate was doing fish, but I can't really do anything about that. What you can do is maybe look at how you're fishing and kind of think, right, the pressure's poor, the fish are up in the surface. I'm not going to feed them. I'm going to put some zig, you know, kind of make the best of what you've got in front of you, because if you can't choose when you go fishing, like myself, I get my set holidays and my set time off that I have from work. I can't really change it, so I just have to make do with what I've got in that respect. So you hear people talk about particular swims and particular fish, and I guess there is a pattern to that, because they wouldn't say it if there wasn't. But I'll give you an example. When I first started on Girton, before they put the stock fish in, so it was a low stock and there was 3 very big fish in there. I had conversations with Crowie about it, and he was kind of like, obviously he wanted to catch one of them 3 big fish. And what he was saying was, he was looking at the captures and looking at where they were coming from and looking at the situation that the angler was in when they caught them. And there weren't many captures of them fish, because back then they came out once a year. So he said that guy had it there, and that's the only fish he had on that visit. So, and then that guy had one of them there, and that's the only fish he had. So Simon was kind of saying, they're loners, they're on their own, they're not with the bunch. There's enough food for them. They don't need to compete for food. There's enough food. So when you're looking at big fish, you can get into the mindset of where, looking at historical captures. And I get that, and I do agree with what he was saying in some respect, but equally, them commons was up the North Bay for 2 months, and they've never been caught there. Now, are you telling me for 2 months they never fed? I don't think that's the case. I think they do feed everywhere, but I think there's certain areas and certain times of year where they're more likely to make a mistake. I get that. I don't think there's a swim or a particular area of the lake where it's the only, if you're not in that swim, you ain't catching the big one. I don't believe that at all. I think there's times of year and periods whereby they're more likely to make a mistake in that area of the lake, but I still think they're catchable everywhere. Right, I'm shooting a cliche out. I'm going to say Savvy, and I'm going to say Sally. Because when I was about 22, 23, so I'd been fishing a few years, maybe 3 or 4 years, I was given a book. And it wasn't by an angler. A friend of mine, his parents ran a country bookstore, and they went away for the weekends doing like book fairs, purely for like country and sport, hunting sports, etc. So we used to go around his house and raid the whiskey cabinet. But anyway, when they came back one day, they says, "Oh, you're into your fishing, aren't you, John? Oh, we got given this in a batch, and it's not something we do." They passed me this book, and it was John Harry, Savvy. And I thought, yeah, I'll have a read of that. And I don't think at that time I'd ever read an angling book. And I'm not trying to say that this is the best angling book, because there's some, obviously we all know there's some awesome books, but at that time in my fishing, I was kind of like learning. I had a lot to learn. I was making mistakes all the time, and I read this book about John Harry, who, by his own admission, he wasn't a particularly brilliant angler when he stumbled across Savvy, but by God, he certainly was when he left, because he learned and he began to develop an understanding of the lake, and that led to success. And the book goes on and on about, you know, how he developed his skills and became not at one with the lake. That sounds a bit cheesy, but he certainly kind of begun to get an understanding of where the fish were and why he was choosing the swims and his baiting patterns, and like looking at rigs, because back then rigs were not in their infancy, but they're certainly not probably as advanced as the rigs that we're using now. And there's a chapter in that book about the queen of the valley, the queen of the lake, you know, Sally, and it was presumed dead. And I'm reading this book, and anyway, the chapter was by a guy called Tony Hall, who nailed it after everybody thought it was dead. And if I remember rightly, it was £39, and it's a big, like golden coloured common. And I've seen the pictures of it, and the way it was written, it was almost as though you was there. And the way that the enthusiasm that these guys had for that capture, and the entire lake, you know, embarked on Tony's swim and enjoyed that capture. So that kind of left a mark on me, because I kind of thought, I'm not that good at carp angling at the moment, but he's done it, and look what he's achieved, and he's fishing one of the toughest lakes in the country. So it kind of gave me the impetus to say, just keep going, keep learning, keep developing, and eventually, you know, if you stick at something, you'll become better at it. So inspirational book, that, for me. In my carp fishing, I kind of, like, more so with being involved with DNA, I've kind of like spread my thoughts out, I suppose, for want of a better expression. But certainly for years, I kind of just kept to myself. it's funny, like we've got a gang of bailiffs who help us out here on the fishery, and they're all young, keen lads, and they'll talk about something and I'll say, no, I don't know nothing about that. And they're like, Vinny, you seriously telling me you don't? I'm like, no, because I don't really. I'm into carp fishing, but I'm not that into carp fishing that I want to know everything about everything. So the question that I've been asked is here, where would I go fishing? If I could go back in time and fish anywhere, where would you go? And I know it sounds weird, because most carp anglers would say, well, I'd have gone there then, I'd have gone there then. I find it difficult, but I suppose if I had to pick one, I'd probably go on the North Lake in the 90s, based on the fish that were there and the anglers that were there. I think you'd be in with a chance of probably the most historical fish in the UK, and you'd be fishing alongside some of the most advanced anglers in the UK. So that's where I'm going to go. But like I say, I kind of like stick into the bubble that I've got, kind of thing. So light bulb moments in carp fishing. If I had to pick a light bulb moment, it would be bait. As simple as that. I remember going back to that club lake that I mentioned. I was having one or two out of there, and I wasn't sponsored by a company, but I kind of did a, I suppose, field test or whatever that actually means. I was getting it a little bit cheaper, and they knew what was going on. And they gave me a new bait. I'm not going to mention them because it doesn't matter, it's years ago. They gave me a new bait and says, oh, Vinny, have a go with this, see how you get on a motorway with this. And at that time I was doing all right on there. I was having a few, I was starting to get to grips with it. So obviously I took this bait and I gave it a go, and just couldn't get a bite. I was fishing the same spots, the same swims, and although it didn't do my fishing any good that period, it taught me certain baits work in certain waters, and I could not get a bite on that bait. And it wasn't a super hard water, it certainly wasn't easy, and I was just like, I can't continue this anymore. And literally I went back to the old bait, and I think I had 3, certainly 2 on my next visit. And that was a light bulb moment, because I still think about that now when I'm fishing, wherever I am. I think about that moment and I think, am I on the right bait? Is this bait going to work for me? And when you look, I mean, like baits, we could talk for hours and hours and hours about bait, and I actually don't really know a lot about it. But what I do know is if you're on the wrong bait, it's always going to be a struggle. So I'm fortunate. I believe in DNA. I've been with them over a decade. I believe in what they do. And I've been very fortunate, because as we go through this, we'll talk about places where I've had mega success. And I think a lot of it is down to working hard, but some of it is down to the bait that you're using. And that was a perfect example of it. Yeah, I covered this one on my vlogs. When I started doing the vlog series with DNA, you know, that's kind of like on the change from my old syndicate, which was Manton, onto Girton. And one of the things that I wanted to capture on the vlog was, I mean, a lot of the fishing stuff that goes out is like alarms going and fish going. Yeah, but fishing ain't like that, and we know that. Certainly fishing places like that ain't like that. So I wanted to capture kind of like the ups and downs of fishing a tough lake. And I'll be honest, at the end of season 2 or year 2, I did have a bit of this is doing my head in a bit. And I was close to not going back, I must admit I was, because my first year I got really lucky when I landed on the lake. I had a couple of nice fish very early on, then the rest of the year was a bit hit and miss. The second year I felt as though I was really fishing hard but getting nothing. I mean, not a full season, not no fish, but you know, a couple of river commons. I think I had a 28 that year, a couple of the smaller 20s, and hard work. And I got to the end of that season and I thought, and I think there's another point to mention, like DNA put no pressure on me to put these vlogs out. I chose to do it, I like it, I love working with cameras, and you know, I think I've developed my skills in that area. But equally, you sat there and you think, I've got nothing for this vlog because I ain't catching now and it doesn't look as though it's going to change. So you do put a little bit of pressure on yourself, I think. Well, I certainly did. And I kind of thought, do I go back there? Do I not? And then whatever inside me said, in fact, I tell you what happened. A good friend of mine who was also a member of Girton, who fully understood what I was talking about, said, Vin, don't. Go back on there. Keep doing what you're doing. You know, it will happen for you. He was moving away. And he said, don't pull off it, just stick with it. So I kind of like thought, right, I'm going to go back in the spring, I'm going to fish it as hard as I can. And actually that spring campaign started in the winter. I started fishing that swim in the January, and I started baiting that area, not because I wanted to fish it in the spring, purely because I'd started catching a few off there, and I had a really good winter on it, which was strange because the winter before I didn't really do I did nothing, in fact, but I started to catch a few. And obviously, as it happens, I caught 2, fish of a lifetime, but it was a 50-50 whether I went somewhere else that winter. And imagine that, going somewhere else when, look what happened to me, and I've mentioned it before in this, I was really fortunate. I'd done everything right, but any of them fish could have picked me up. That first afternoon when I had measles, anything could have picked me up that day. There were fish across that bar, it wasn't the only fish there. And the exact same thing a couple of weeks later when I had tootie. Anything could have picked me up. So there was an element of luck in it, but equally, I'm glad that I didn't give in, and I'm glad that I stuck to my guns and kind of thought, no, I'll get one no matter what it takes. So then, if anybody's in a similar situation, I feel your pain, because it's frustrating, because especially if you've got a mobile phone, because you're like, ping, oh mate's had a 30 ping, oh so-and-so's had a 40 ping, he's had a massive hit off there, and you're like, and you automatically think, should I go there? Should I just? And I think the second you start going somewhere else, that's the second you're moving away from the capture. Even if you don't think it's going to, like I said it before in my vlogs, even when I thought weather's poor, it hasn't done any fish this week, I still went, and I'm glad I did. And yeah, I stuck at it, but I'm not saying it was easy, because it did my nutting, I'll be perfectly honest with you, but the rewards were there at the end, weren't they? Do you have to be single-minded to be a carp angler? Or to be a successful carp angler? No. It depends what you want out of carp fishing. I know people who are very single-minded. Carp fishing is all they think about, it's all they do. And they've got good photo albums. But is that what I want? No, I think you have to strike a balance. 90% of my fishing is done on my own, and that's not because I ain't got any friends. It's because I use carp fishing probably like most of us do. It's my getaway from work, it's my chill out time, it's my me time, and we all do it. Why do people go hitting a golf ball round a golf course? Yeah, they probably do like the game, but equally I reckon a large percentage of it is they're out the office or whatever they do for a living. So that's why I go carp fishing. But I do fish on my own a lot, but that doesn't make me a moody old git who don't want to be near anybody, because I'm still pretty sociable. But I think I do like to think I've got etiquette in my angling. There's a lot of stroke pullers out there. We see it. I kind of think when I see people doing like naughty tricks, I think in years to come you won't do that, and you look back on that and think, yeah, that probably wasn't the right thing to do. I think there's a little bit of an element of desperation in carp fishing, because it's become so, what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a success game in some respects, isn't it? Whereby who's had this, he's had that, and I don't like that side of it. I think when there's something that you can be successful at, there's always going to be a competitive side to it. And I generally speaking, I fish really hard. At the moment, I'll be honest, I don't think I'm fishing anything like my best. There's probably reasons for that. I think, fishing, well, my last 2 syndicates I've fished before I've come onto the one that I'm on now, I fished them really hard, really intensely. And I'll talk a little bit about, not the Girton one, the one before that, because the syndicate I was on before Girton was where I felt I was at my best I've ever been at angling. And yeah, my photo album looked really good for it, but is that healthy? It tired me out, if I'm honest. I'm going down the syndicate now, and I know it sounds strange, and 10 years ago I would have never done this, but I'm kind of looking at the wildlife, and I'm looking at they've got bird boxes around the lake, and I really like it because I've been watching them and filming the birds and all that. I am trying to catch them. I've not had a very successful start to it, and I'm working on that, but equally I'm kind of seeing a bit more than just gotta catch. In the early stages of shooting my vlog, I got a little bit like, I've got to get footage. I'm like, I don't need to get footage. DNA don't put any pressure on me to put anything out. The vlogs will come as and when the fish do. So I am relaxing now in my carp fishing. Even when I go to France, when I first started going to France, I was a bloody idiot for 2 months before I got there. You know, I've got to get this right, got to get that right. Oh, am I going to catch what swim? You know, and I'm like, that's not healthy. So now I go to France. Usually, you know, now with Joanne, I go with my wife to France. So it's more of a, let's get the fridge ready and let's get some nice meals. And yeah, we do try and catch a few, of course, but nothing like what I used to be. So single-minded, have I been single-minded? A little bit, but with a filter, I think. And now probably a lot less than what I was in the past. I love fishing, I love catching fish, but it's not the be-all and end-all, is it? Where I fish in France, or certainly where I used to fish in France, was, you know, big weedy lakes, and it was a rowing boat job. You couldn't, certainly some of the lakes I've fished in France, you certainly couldn't land a fish to the bank without a boat. Impossible. You're just not getting them through. And one of the things I really like about it is when I go to France, I usually go with my wife. So we take the camper van and the awning and what have you, and we get everything set out how we like it with the fridge. You know, it's comfy fishing, not like what it used to be. It's comfy fishing. So I'm normally up first, and I normally get up around about first light. I've got that like a carp clock. Whenever I'm fishing, it's first light, because I think it's because I've been doing it for so long. I always get up at first light. I set my alarm, but I rarely need it. So many a time I've been up at first light. First thing I do is a coffee, and I just sit in my chair and I'm looking across the lake, and the sun's just starting to show and the steam coming off the lake, and you see the odd one show. And for me, one of the best feelings in carp fishing is when one of them rods belts off and you're like life jacket on. And if you've never done it before, I advise it. It's brilliant. When you get into the boat, I don't use the motor to go to the fish. I use the rod, so I just gently wind down, and the tension of the line draws me to the fish, and you actually use the rod to steer the boat. And if you've never done it before, let your mate do it first, because you pull on the rod and you just go around in circles. It's pretty amusing. I've done that to a few friends. So you can imagine it. It's first light, you know, the birds are starting to do something. It's just atmospheric, and you've got one on, and you just sat in your boat and you're just gently winding down to the fish, and you can see little spots of fizz where fish have been feeding, and you're just winding down to it, and you just, the only sound you can hear is the birds, and you wind down to the fish and you can see it's a good one. It's a mega feeling in carp fishing, and I'm glad I've fished those type of lakes to have that experience. So a syndicate that I was on about 6 years ago was a place called Manton in northern Lincolnshire, and been on the waiting list a while. I'd heard about it, and there's 2 lakes on Manton. There's the old lake, which had the big one, which was a mid 40, and then the new lake, which was a bigger lake. Instantly I warmed to the bigger lake. It was just more for me, so I got on that new lake, and I'd done pretty much what I'm doing now. I'd had a really ropey start to it. I think I'd done about 3 or 4 months, and I hadn't had a fish. And you know, there was nothing too nasty, but there was 1 or 2 of the old members were kind of like saying, oh, this sponsored lad, he hasn't done that yet, oh yeah, you know. And I didn't take it to heart, but I kind of thought, you know, and not so much in fishing, but in other things in life, when somebody said you can't do something or you're not very good at something, I generally, it makes me better at it. And I started getting my team. My first season on there wasn't brilliant. I did end up getting a few, but it wasn't brilliant. But my second season on there, you know, I think I alluded to it before. It was where I was at my best as a carp angler. I probably know that lake better than any lake I've ever fished. And I started to become pretty successful on it. There was about 25, 30s in the lake, I think, about at that time. And I was fishing that hard. I was moving through the night. I tell you one thing I did. I was baiting a spot, which not many people fished in that corner. And I was setting up in another swim, right? And then at midnight, I wasn't even fishing that swim properly, but I was setting up in that swim. At midnight, I was moving to my baited spot, catching fish, and then moving off to actually hide where I was fishing. And that, yeah, probably was to keep people off it. But the point I'm trying to make was I was in tune with that lake. And, you know, the A-team were just going ping, 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 ping. And I remember I was starting my 3rd season on there, and I'd had most of the A-team out of that lake. And there was 2 that I hadn't had. There was a fish called diamond scale, which I was surprised I hadn't had that. I'd had single scale 4 times, and like, oh God, what was there in there? There was the big common, there was the scatter scale common, the long common, there was paw print, the linear, both the leathers. You know, these are all, probably not all 30s when I caught them, but certainly at times a year there were 30s. So I was, you know, I was fishing at my best. And there was these 2 fish that I hadn't had, not had diamond scale, not had the black common. And I was fishing out the left-hand side of the woods, and I was doing really well. I had a few theories about why I was catching on there. I mentioned this on my vlog recently when I was up on the trout lake. Most of the members on there were using bait boats. Now, I don't want to get into a bait boat thing here, but when they were selling the bait boats out, they were like pouring a load of bait into it naturally, which is what you would do, and there was mounds of bait. And I honestly believe that if you fill your bait boat up with bait, there's certain fish in that lake you'll never catch. You'll never catch them because they'll just spook off it. So what I was doing, I was fishing a single and just baiting all over. And like I mentioned it on the trout lake when I went up there, and I know the lockdown stopped me carrying on there, but I was getting a bit of momentum on there. I was starting to have a few. Again, that's a similar thing where a lot of people are using boats, where I'm purposely landing my spot like that, like a tennis court size area. And that's what I was doing on Manton, and I was just nailing them. And I was sat there in the woods swim, and the owner of the lake actually came to see me, and one of my rods went off, diamond scale. Yes, that is one of the ones. Really pretty fish, mega made up, happy as Larry. And I'm sat there thinking, yeah, that's probably me done on here, because you know I'd caught most of the, well, nearly all of them. And then the left-hand rod belted off the black common, 2 in one morning. So I'm sat there with probably there was 3 or 4 that I hadn't caught in actual fact of the main ones, but there were certainly 2 that would be the ones you'd want. Within an hour, I'd had them both. So that was a bit of a carp fishing moment for me. I think back to them days where I started out and I was going down to Baker's and I'd never had a 20 and everything was new, everything was, you know, the next challenge. And I think back to them days, and it was just, you know, I don't want to go back there now because I don't want it to be different to what I think it is. I'm kind of keeping that what it was. And I remember I was working full time at the garage then, so it was 1 night a week, and I had to be back to work the next day. And I didn't get speeding tickets because I was so excited, I was so keen, it was my night and I was doing it, and just massively passionate about what I was doing. And I kind of think, like 30 years later, I kind of think, I'm not like that, but it's still there. I mean, we're fishing here now, there's some nice fish in here, but there's no monsters in here, but I'm still running to them rods if one of them rods goes off now. And I think if you lose that, that's your point to reevaluate, maybe have a bit of time off. I've never had any time off from carp fishing. I can't remember a winter I haven't done. I can't remember a summer I haven't done. You know, in, like I say, in 30 years, I've never not been an angler. I've never even thought, let's do, yeah, I've had moments. Yeah, I mentioned it on Girton when things weren't going my way and it was tough. But I put myself on that lake, so there was only me to blame for that. So I've had down moments. I've lost big fish. Yeah, we all have. But I've always kind of maintained that passion. It's something. And another thing, like, some of you probably won't like this, but when I started carp fishing, I mentioned earlier, I didn't know anybody who did it. I used to have a car garage. When I first got the car garage, I put some carp talks in reception. Nobody ever looked at them. 10 years on, when I sold the garage, there wasn't a week go by where somebody didn't look at who's the carp angler then? And I look back at when I started carp fishing, I think, you know, I did it for the right reasons. I just had this passion for them. I seen them, I thought, I want to catch them. And it was almost as though it was mine. It wasn't mine, of course. There was hundreds of carp anglers across the country then, probably thousands. It certainly wasn't what it is now, but there was a lot of people doing it. But I had that, carp fishing was me. That was my thing. None of my friends did it. I didn't know anybody who did it. So if I went to the pub, and I've never been a geezer, yeah, footy, let's watch the footy, let's have a pint and a fight. I like going out with my friends and what have you, but I've never been that type of geezer type guy. And when my pals are being geezers, I love it. I love that social type of thing. I've got my carp fishing. I've got this little thing. This is mine. Nobody's got this. And I think we kind of lost that now because it's become as mainstream as it is. So I'm glad I had that moment in carp fishing whereby, like I said, I wasn't the only carp. not being stupid here, but it was my little bubble, it was my little thing that I felt as though it was nobody really knew about it, nobody knew how good it was, and it was my thing. So yeah, I think back to those times, and it was brilliant, but the fire's still burning. I'm not as intense as what I used to be. I certainly don't pull my hair out if I've had a blank. You know, I'm blanking at my syndicate now, I mentioned it. I'm not pulling it. 10 years ago, I'd be like, what's going on? You know what I mean? I would have done, I was like that. Whereas now, it'll happen, I'll get it right, we'll get a couple of them, and you know, so I'm kind of calmed down with my fishing, but I'm a carp angler, and I'll always be a carp angler.